from Maker Resources. You mentioned that getting unilateral agreement was a challenge and a barrier to broader sustainability within O2. Do you think possibly there's an argument there for increased government regulation to make this a reality?
No. I think going from one level of incompetence to another is probably not to be commended in this particular situation. Don't get me wrong, I'm not copping out on the stuff that we have to do ourselves. We've taken some big risks as a business, but on the overall systemic change side, that tends to need some more collaboration across industry sectors. But government intervention is not something I would recommend. Lord forbid.
We got another question. Simon over here.
Hi, Simon Abrams from Ernst & Young. Really interested in the flexible working sort of model. I just wondered if that day in Slough, how did you capture the benefits and did you really see the increase in productivity and efficiency
Yep.
that
So we did a full statistical analysis and research. One of the beauties of a business like ours is you can actually tell people when they're actually engaged, because they're logged into the network and actually using data traffic moving between them, as opposed to logged in and gone to the garden or gone to play golf. So yeah, we can get real data. And some of the key things were an overall increase in satisfaction from employees, but a 20% increase in productivity. And the driver of the productivity was interesting, was a combination of time that was saved from commuting. Some of that was contributed back to the company. Some of it was contributed back to better work-life balance, time with families. Some was delivered back to 15 minutes extra in bed in the morning, which I'm not sure which category that falls into. But so there was some real tangible benefits. But enablers for it are also critical. So, for example, we have a BYO scheme, which means that you can bring your own technology to work and have it enabled so that you can use the same technology you would choose to use at home. This idea of giving everybody a computer at home or giving them access, may not be the way to go, because very often what you find is corporates have inferior IT to what people have in their own homes, generally. So by our BYO scheme, it means that people can use their iPads and various other things and use them securely. The guys in the IT department had a bit of a hissy fit when we started that program, but now they're on board and they're absolutely championing it. So it's about measurement, yes, but it's also about going to the roots of some of the key enablers. And the fact that you can use whatever equipment you want, wherever you want, whenever you want, is a big move from a luggable that you have to take from the office. And remember, I'm not working in the office tomorrow, so I have to remember to bring it home at 6 o'clock when I leave, and then I have to check it back in when I go back to the office next Monday or Tuesday. So that we found really positive. Engagement was very high. People loved the fact that we were willing to do the experiment, and we're going to keep going with it. So what we've agreed is that each directorate is going to pick a day, and making sure that we don't create too much in the way of silo working, is they're going to champion a particular day where you're out of the office activity, whether that be home-based or whether it be up in the city for meetings or with agencies, will be done. And that way we'll spread the load on the office environment evenly across the week. Oddly enough, the car park's quieter on Mondays and Fridays than it is on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I suspect that's a pretty universal experience. So we're doing that and trying to continue to embed. We're using our own technology, things like our, video conferencing facilities, but also just our own conferencing facility. Every customer of O2 can dial a short code and have up to 12 people on a conference call at the same time. How good are we actually telling our customers about that? Actually, not very good. It's 323 short code, by the way. Fiona.
Hi, I'm Fiona Black. I'm Chief Executive of the National Youth Agency. We have the privilege...
Partner in crime.
We have the privilege of working with these guys. And I suppose actually I say it's a privilege because it consistently is a privilege to hear a CEO of a major corporate talking about young people as the future, young people as the place that business should be investing. And your passion and commitment has always been something that we've been kind of truly inspired by as a youth organisation. I suppose my question to you is really the same as Chris's issue, which is, Why aren't more people doing it if it makes such good business sense?
I think generally the business sector's engagement with the charitable sector is underdeveloped. I think the business sector, when it deals with young people, tries to go through formal, rigid structures like the classroom and various other things. And while I'm not criticising the classroom, it doesn't create the context for a corporate to be able to define a programme that actually meets its particular needs. One of the things I'm involved in, maybe some others in the room, is the eSkills Council. And getting involved in that, one of the logics of that is that's corporates engaging in a way that says, you know what, the current GCSE program is not delivering the sort of experience that employers will want for people who are coming out maybe without A-levels. So how do we change that and make it more relevant to future opportunity, i.e. tangible, relevant skills? They run after-school clubs for girls to get them more involved in ICT. They have a new computer science program, degree program that they've developed and is running now, I think, in 13 universities. So I think we have to go and look at some of these enablers along the way, and then the more, I think, companies engage with competent organisations like your own, Fiona, that says, you know what, we can trust somebody to do this, because big corporates probably aren't great at dealing with 12, 13, 14-year-olds, but people like yourselves are well established. That's why we didn't go out and try and invent it. We went and said, let's work with somebody who knows what we're doing. And I think through the programme now, it's about 60 different charitable organisations that effectively will work through you guys through. So that's a model that I would absolutely recommend, and it's one of the drivers behind the Business in the Community United Futures initiative, is for people to, for corporates to get more comfortable dealing with the charitable sector, and that way dealing with youth.
I'm just going to ask a question that's come in online, which is, the business models of the entire telecoms industry is focused on driving growth in data and calls and overconsumption. This is common to most consumer industries and is a key driver of unsustainability. If we really want to achieve sustainability, should we be considering changing this approach, getting rid of incentives that make it cheaper to use more data and calls, reversing this and making it more expensive if you talk more, consume more?
So I think this is what I would describe as the debate about substitution. I mean, for me, communications is a critical component of distribution and transportation. It's an intermodal choice. So whether that be somebody like Amazon, who used to send a truck down the street to send you your book, who now fires it, squirts it down either over a Wi-Fi or a cellular connection to give you your digital book, that's an intermodal shift for them in their business model from one to another. Vastly more efficient way of distributing the books, no waste, etc., etc., etc. So you can look at that cycle end to end, and you can be very clear. Similarly, effective communications, eliminating road transport, air travel, whatever. So I'm not saying that everything we do by right means that it's good, and we have to make sure that we keep our house in order, but we afford the opportunity for people to have real choices of alternatives. The ultimate for us is, with real-time access to data right across the economy, it's not about being slightly smarter in where I have my warehouse. It's eliminating the warehouse completely, because of your real-time electronic point of sale information with all of your real-time transportation information that says I actually don't build the warehouse and therefore I don't drive the trucks there at all. So I do think that the smart use of ICT is a fundamental part of how we're smarter. Ultimately, the economy is an information economy, and the best type of information economy is when you have perfect information.
Hi, Jill Huntley from Accenture. I was very interested in your comments about co-opetition. Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
Wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the conditions that you think are required to make that successful. I mean, you said it took a while and that there was some constancy at the CEO level which helped, but in any given industry, what are the things that you think, as a result of your experiences, would make that possible?
Crisis is very good. You should never waste the opportunity of a good crisis. It genuinely makes people think differently. I think to the question earlier about government intervention, and I'm not anti-government, regulation is is a challenge, but it could potentially also be an opportunity. Certainly, I'll talk to the telecoms industry. I've also worked in the logistics industry and the banking industry. But in the telecoms industry, we are absolutely in fear of regulators, legislators all the time. The equivalent of what we've done in the UK with Vodafone, there was a group set up across Europe called the E5, which was the 5 biggest operators in Europe, who were looking at issues, anything from digital confidence and child protection, net neutrality, all the way through to various other things. So the EU's opened up an investigation on the basic premise that if the 5 of you were in the one place together, that raises a competition question. So it's a real issue. I think necessity is the biggest practical driver. And I'll be honest with you, in the UK, the business case for rolling out 4G for any operator in the UK does not exist. Simply doesn't exist. Yet the government is absolutely right in saying we need to deliver on the digital dividend. So it behoves businesses like ours to say, well, if that's what needs to happen, what do we have to do differently? So I do think using, economic crisis is probably a great way for people to, I started off, and I didn't overly labor it, but fresh thinking, new possibilities. For me, it's all about, it's all very well doing something more efficiently. The real opportunity is what are the things that you fundamentally do differently, and what are the different things that you do. And in co-opetition models, we have one example at the moment where Vodafone, Everything Everywhere, and ourselves have proposed to set up an advertising and m-commerce business as effectively an aggregator in the market. It's currently with the EC for regulatory approval, but that's a good example of a new model for a new marketplace. It's almost easier to start off and say, so what are the new things that are happening? M-commerce is taking off, mobile advertising is taking off. To cooperate in those and create some new ecosystems from scratch rather than try to tear down the old systems, maybe where the co-opetition ultimately should go to.
Hi, David Freeze from BNDS. I was with you all the way until you said you were an Arsenal fan, and you lost me at that point. But at some point, at some time, someone in the organisation must have come to you with an idea that elicited the response of, "Are you mad?" What was that idea, and what have you done about it?
It's a good question. We've probably had two. It wasn't me, but might have been the marketing director who said, when you take the charger out of the box, "Are you mad? How are they going to plug it in?" An interesting aside, but it doesn't happen anymore, but when I first joined the business, about 10% of customers used to call within a week of acquiring their first phone. So it was working perfectly for the first few days, but doesn't seem to be working now. So maybe we should have those chargers in the box after all, so that at least guys in the call center can say, by the way, that's what that lead is for. So no, seriously, probably the taking the chargers out, but actually essentially going to the manufacturers, as we did about 3 years ago, and said, if you don't move towards a single type of interconnection on the phones, a number of the biggest operators will seriously consider delisting your product. And it moved from that would be interesting to this is actually going to happen. And I think probably the other thing that I think is probably the one where we ultimately balked was we source energy from renewable sources, but we were going to fund a wind farm in the UK. And in the end, we pulled out, we balked at it. And honest truth was, economics were marginal, as those of you who've looked at that space. It was the lack of consensus among our customers, essentially, that was the ultimate factor. It's one where there's just not enough common ground there, even to take a champion position. And we do have a reputational risk, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I have a business that operates under a brand that's worth $8 billion. So we do have to take that into account. So we will take risks, no question. We will bring people on journeys, but I don't think that you can outsource to an individual corporate that core education of, evolving the debate in certain issues. And when the debate's insufficiently evolved, I think it's legitimate for people to say, actually, that's one for some other organisation, be it non-profit or whatever else, to move that agenda forward. But eco rating is a good example. Some of the manufacturers hated it, but we said that's absolutely fine. From a reputational point of view, we're perfectly happy to piss off manufacturers because we're giving more information to customers.
Right. I have a question here from Twitter on collaborative consumption, which is an area that we've featured in the Green Monday program quite a lot, and we've looked at GM investing in relay rides. And generally, there's quite a lot of skepticism of how big collaborative consumption is going to be as a trend. So this question says, how big do you think the collaborative consumption P2P sharing economy will be? And do you see O2 owning sharing platforms? Is this a big opportunity for you?
So I do think it's going to be big, but it goes to the behavioural, one that's often referred to as something like Airbnb as an example around, changing models and people renting out their spare rooms. Well, you know what, if you're under 35, you probably think that's absolutely fine. If you're over 45, you think, I can't believe that you would actually expect me to go and do that. So I think it's finding the stuff that's most relevant to drive adoption. But things like, the car sharing models and some of the other things are actually taking some of the old models of business and actually making them available to consumers through the collaborative element and the aggregation element. 15 years ago when I worked in a logistics business, we bought trucking by X pence per mile from Volvo. That's how we bought it at the time. So the notion of, the car sharing, carpooling, some of those models is just bringing some of the business models that were there B2B and bring them B2C. So I think it'll absolutely move. And I do think that people like ourselves could well be part of some of those sharing platforms because to the extent that connectivity or trust are part of it, then I think they are two elements that we would see as roles that we can play, connectivity and trust.
And Wayra came up in our conversations. Do you want to talk about Wayra?
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know, Wayra, which is a dialect word in Quechuan, one of the South American dialects, means wind, is a model that we've adopted and brought across first Latin America and now across Europe. And it was essentially based on the premise of we're doing stuff on young people at different levels, but one of the things that certain of our countries that we operate in were finding was flight of talent because there wasn't a local ecosystem around early startup, seed capital, other things that was allowing young people with ideas to stay in country. So the first place we actually started up Wayra was in Colombia, where most of the South Americans end up migrating towards California. And the basic premise is that we open a call for projects every 6 months. We invite people to send in their projects. They are essentially on, in the broad sense, the ICT space. They don't have to be things that Telefonica can use, but they're in the ICT space. And the simple model is we'll review them. We will put a panel of mentors and coaches together. We will provide training and development for people. And every 6 months we pick, in most of the other markets, it's 10 at a time. In the UK, we choose to pick 20 at a time, and those 20 people are offered up to 50,000 euros of funding, plus accommodation, coaching, mentoring, support, anything from how do you produce a business case to go and do your first pitch to private equity, all the way through to access to technology, etc., and create an incubator startup model. The simple thing that we ask for is we don't ask for exclusivity on anything, but we ask for, in return for the funding, is a 10% stake. And to be clear, we're asking for a 10% stake in Slideware, because most of these things are not businesses. They are ideas, and we're saying you can spend our money turning your idea into a prototype or an opportunity that could then be fundable by the next wave of financing. And the logic of that for us is, again, and it doesn't have to be young people, although not surprisingly, the majority of the people who do come into the project are kind of under 35, but it's about creating more agility than a big organization like ours can naturally have. So we let the lunatics take over the asylum.
Now we've probably got time for 2 more questions. So we've got one question here, and then I think we've got one at the back as well.
Hi, talking about lunatics taking over the asylum, how do you engage your employees from a bottom-up perspective, particularly in your major initiatives?
So really important. Telefonica as an organisation globally is one of the largest corporate volunteering organisations, including over 100,000 of our employees involved in our Pro Niño project in Latin America, which is our equivalent of Think Big in Europe. So it's in the DNA of the organisation, not just in the UK, but across, and very much in the chairman's DNA. The simple essence for us is we all want to work for companies that we can be proud of. And so we went out and asked our people, what are the things that are important to you, rather than say, Ronan's decided it's sustainability. And young people and being a more sustainable business was very important to them. And so there's an active level of participation. So we have big thinkers on all of our sites, as I mentioned earlier. And those people, if you have no interest in sustainability, you can be a young person, big thinker and involved on the youth side of things. If you've no interest in young people and only interest in sustainability, you can be on that side. So we've, under the umbrella, people can choose the areas where there's real interest and enthusiasm. And our concept is the simple model. In most organizations, you've 10% of people at most who are going to be passionate about something, 40% of people who are willing to be led, and 50% of people who are ambivalent. If we turn some of the 40% into more like the 10%, then there's a good chance that some of the 50% will melt over time. And, you know, we track, you know, on the reputation index, so RepTrack, we track how people perceive us. We measure with our own employees on our own Reflect survey, where we specifically ask them about the values of the company and their affinity towards them, and our youth programs and other things. So we don't just believe our own BS, we go out and ask. So it is sustainable, because I'll be gone, you know, in due course. I'm the longest serving CEO in the sector, so my days are probably numbered. But this is much more important than any one individual. So it's critical that it's embedded in a way that it will survive. And if I was fired tomorrow and the next CEO came in and said, I don't think there's any great agenda for sustainability, the troops would rally against that. And that's what will ultimately decide what O2's brand is worth in a few years' time, is that absolute commitment to the cause.
One last question at the back.
Hi, Ronan. James Farr. Congratulations on the product eco ratings. I think it's a fantastic move that O2 have taken. But I do have some concerns, especially with the conflict resource issue. In the composite eco rating, you put together environmental ratings where continuous improvement is reducing impact is the watchword. But you put that together with a conflict resource, and in the methodology that you've put together, you describe the problem, including rape and murder, and I think you'd be congratulated in the frankness that you've employed there in describing the problem. But I wonder, though, what's the message to consumers when you sort of rank, you know, minus a point for rape and murder, you know, plus a point for energy and efficiency? Do you think you ought to take a more absolute stand on this, both in terms of O2, and if you can't, because it's further up your supply chain, that you ought to activate your consumers, that they should demand sort of zero tolerance on this?
So, really good question. Hopefully everybody heard. My view is a very simple one. We create incentive. So since we launched the eco rating, the average rating of the devices and the manufacturers has increased. Why? Because it's a competitive world out there. So rather than exclude them and actually do nothing about the agenda, by engaging them and actually creating healthy competition between suppliers, and also making sure that we have the ability to audit up through supply chains, et cetera, says overnight, I'm not failing to recognize that there are issues out there, but what I am saying is that if I can create incentives for people to behave better, then that net is a good thing. So that's the judgment we've made. The alternative would be to take some of those things out and say they're out with our our control. But I think it's more honest for us to put them in there and say, actually, by creating competition between the manufacturers, you know, it's no secret that RIM were not in the first launch of the eco rating system, but they burst a gut for 6 months to make sure that they were in the next time round, and we continue to see people compete and move up the rating scale. So I think it's a legitimate balance that we take, because we do create incentive for good behaviour on part of the manufacturers. By excluding, there's no incentive.
Ronan, you've given us 75 minutes of your time, and it's been really a great privilege to have an insight into the way you're seeing the business. I think probably the two things that I take away from it are, firstly, that it's a very pragmatic program, and you know, there's a real business sense behind what you're doing. And I think the focus on the social element makes it a very contemporary strategy, and I think there are a lot of other companies who will be looking with great interest at what you've been doing, and particularly the three-point program, which we haven't actually articulated tonight, but it's in the document we published. It's a very methodological program. So I think there's that, and then I think the second sort of very interesting thing you said was if you left, your employees would demand sustainability, and that, I think, implies that Bill Ayres is nearly out of a job. But thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to have you on our stage. So put our hands together. Just three things from me. Firstly, there's actually a lot of work that goes on with the team in getting these company-based Green Mondays together. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to Bill, Simon, Gareth and Saul, wherever they are. Thank you for your help in it. Secondly, you'll get a FIFO email at 8 o'clock. That's about feedback. Helps us to understand what you think we can do better or what we think we're doing well. We appreciate your feedback. And lastly, next month we move away from scarcity into ingenuity. And we're really asking, is the positioning of sustainability as a scarcity issue no longer appropriate? No longer appropriate partly because we're starting to see a lot of the radical technologies come through, and these are the ones that we can now start to back. But rather like the austerity argument, scarcity doesn't motivate. And actually, if we move to ingenuity, it's more Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs becomes the good guy rather than the villain. But when we're focusing on water, and we think that we're really asking, if we think different, can we turn scarcity into abundance? Thank you all very much. Enjoy your round tables.